Today, I want to rank every single Far Cry game on a tier list. You might recall I've done this before, but I want to redo it today because, well, that video was my second video I've ever made. Yeah, it did really well. It's one of the most popular videos on the channel, but again, it was my second video I ever made, and it's not that great, and it's pretty bad if you ask me. So I wanted to do a 2022 version, since that video released before Far Cry 6 came out, and well, now Far Cry 6 is out, and all 4 of its DLCs are now out. So I think it's fair. I think it's fair to judge Far Cry 6 now. And some of my opinions on the games have changed slightly. Some games have gone up and down tiers, and as I've replayed some of them this year. Let's not waste any more time, and let's get straight into where the franchise began with Far Cry 1. Far Cry 1 released in 2004 as the only game in the entire series to not be developed by Ubisoft. The first ever entry was created by a German company called Crytek, who you might know from the Crysis series or Hunt Showdown. Far Cry 1 has a story unlike anything else in the series, featuring mutant monster things, and there's kind of some sci-fi looking labs and enemies. I've played Far Cry 1, however I've never had any urge to ever replay it, and I think it comes down to it's just different experience than any other entry in the series, as it's a level-based experience. Now, the levels are quite massive. There's quite a lot of variety in waging and tackle objectives, and there's just huge levels, and they're basically like mini open worlds. But still, it's a far cry from the rest of the open world entries. Far Cry 1 isn't bad at all, but I'd rather play any other entry in the series, as Far Cry 1 just has a story I'm not really interested in, and the level-based approach just isn't why I play Far Cry. I give Far Cry 1 a C tier. Not because it's bad by any means, but its level design and just the general way the gameplay is, it's just not why I play Far Cry. It's not a problem, the game isn't bad, it's just not why I play Far Cry. We enter Africa in our second entry in the series, Far Cry 2. This is also the first mainline Far Cry game developed by Ubisoft. Far Cry 2 tried something unique and different, and in my opinion, it didn't work all the time, and I've been pretty hard on Far Cry 2 in these videos. But I've recently gone back and I've played some Far Cry 2 myself, and I can't lie, I actually had a lot of fun, and I was kind of surprised how much I was enjoying myself in Far Cry 2. It makes me wish that Ubisoft actually would one day go out and remaster this game, because visually and graphics wise, this game could really use a fresh coat of paint to just make it look a bit better, because it does look kind of rough nowadays. Far Cry 2 really surprises me. Its gameplay I used to think was annoying with the weapon jamming especially, but I actually found myself enjoying the weapon jamming, as it helped add an extra layer of realism and immersion to the combat that I didn't think I ever wanted. Though I still find some faults with the game. I didn't like the multiple maps and using a GPS thing. I didn't really like that. I just didn't get why I had 101 different maps and a GPS. Though, I won't lie to you, when I did replay it this year, it did add a level of immersion and realism to the world that I've never gone from any other Far Cry game or any other game in general. And I kinda liked it, but I also kinda didn't. I'm definitely split on whether I like the multiple maps and using a GPS and instead of having a mini-map. I'm definitely split on it. Far Cry 2 has really grown on me recently. After replaying it, I just find it's a unique experience that no other game out there has truly captured it. I can't think of any other game that did what Far Cry 2 did with its kind of almost super realistic and immersive world. There's just really no other game quite like it. I've got to give Far Cry 2 a place at the surprisingly high A tier. It falls just short of the S tier in one way that I don't think I'll ever change my opinion on. That's the story. I just didn't care at all for the story of Far Cry 2. I just didn't really like how the ending in the last couple hours of the game was handled. I didn't really like the last couple hours. And I just wasn't a fan of any of the characters in the campaign. I can't really even remember most of their names. I remember the Jackal, and that's about it. So yeah, I think an A tier is fair for Far Cry 2. Far Cry 3 is the one that basically created the entire formula for the series. Every entry from 2012 onwards has followed the blueprint that Far Cry 3 created, with the main villain being the center stage, a massive open world to explore, a more arcade experience compared to Far Cry 2, and of course the radio towers. However, radio towers wouldn't last that long, they'd only last one more mainline entry. Far Cry 3 is almost perfection. It's so close to being the perfect Far Cry game, but one game is just so much better, and we'll get to that game very soon. Again, just my opinion, but I think one game is just better than Far Cry 3. Far Cry 3's got some great gameplay for sure, however it can feel a little dated, especially when you compare it directly to the newer entries, but I still think Far Cry 3's gameplay is strong enough and still holds up for the most part. Far Cry 3 also has one of the best villains ever, and that's with Vass. However, it's also got one of the worst Far Cry villains with Hoyt. In my opinion, Hoyt just wasn't all that great. You spend half the game with Vass, an incredibly well acted and well written character, and then you got to spend the rest of the game with Hoyt. It was just boring, to be honest. Just boring. Far Cry 3 is truly fantastic, and I still love it to this day, and I can easily still say it's an S tier game, even with its shortcomings in the second half of the game with Hoyt, and the gameplay starting to show its age, which isn't a problem of the game, but again, when you compare it to the other more modern entries, which you have to do on the tier list, it definitely shows its age. The game is still a blast. It's still an S tier game, it's still a blast, and if you haven't played it, I think if you picked it up today, like if you go on out, watch this video right now, go and buy the game if you've never played it, I still think you'll really enjoy the game, because I still think there's a lot to love in Far Cry 3. Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon is an amazing game, and marks the start of the new spin-off direction the games would follow up until Far Cry 6, which is releasing a mainline, numbered game and then a year later do a spin-off title. Blood Dragon is great, it's got some great humour, with its amazing story, but I do wish the gameplay was slightly more unique, but I'll give it a pass in that regard, since Blood Dragon was basically a DLC for Far Cry 3 that got released on its own standalone DLC thing. Blood Dragon can be a little short though, it's roughly about 4 to 6 hours depending on how you play the game, and I just wish it was a little bit longer, not too much longer, maybe 7-8 hours, but again, it's because it was more meant to be more of a DLC than its massive spin-off game like Primal and New Dawn. There's really not much more to say about Blood Dragon that hasn't been said before. It's got a great story with some fun humour and a blast to play. It's a little short, but in my opinion, it's still an easy A tier in my opinion. I still love Blood Dragon. Far Cry 4 is not just a good Far Cry game. Far Cry 4 is the best Far Cry game that took almost everything that Far Cry 3 did and just did it better in my opinion. Far Cry 4 has better and more fun gameplay in my opinion, with fun new additions such as finally being able to fly using the buzzer or gyrocopter, and that led to some great co-op moments by the way. Elephants were also super fun. You could cause tons of mayhem, go out and let elephants loose and they could just cause mayhem. It was amazing letting those elephants loose. And there's also tons of other gameplay things, but those are two highlights in my opinion. Overall, I love the story of Far Cry 4. I like that there wasn't a clear-cut good guy and a clear-cut bad guy, but by that I mean you can't just come into the game and be like, okay, so the good guys are those guys and the bad guys is that guy. I like that, because you don't really have a good guy and a bad guy. Pagan Min might seem evil on the surface, but the game kind of raises the question of, is it better to let one of the Golden Path leaders take over, as they have major faults and problems, and they may make Kyrat worse than, whereas Pagan Min, Kyrat's doing okay. People don't have a great life, but at least they're living alright, whereas under the Golden Path, things just might be worse. I like that in this game. The rebel group that you've been fighting for and everything might just not be better for the country, and I like that there's no real good ending in this game. Technically the best ending is actually just to sit for 15 minutes at the opening. I'd say that's probably the best one. I just not get involved in the game, but I really like the story concept. I do understand that a lot of people might not enjoy that, and that's completely fine to me. But for me personally, I like that. I really like that this game tried something different, and I loved it, to be fair. It's just a great game. Not much more I need to say on the matter. As you might have guessed by now, yes, Far Cry 4 is an S tier Far Cry in my opinion. Far Cry Primal is a game I'm not that big on. I've said many times now how much I don't really like Far Cry Primal, and I tried a couple months ago to give the game another try, and I just still don't really like it all that much. Primal is a game I won't ever come to like, if I'm being completely honest. I don't think I ever will like it. I respect that Ubisoft tried something different, but the entire setting of the game is my major problem. I don't like Stone Age time period. I'm not gonna lie, there's just nothing appealing about Stone Age setting for me. And Primal being set in the Stone Age kinda means the game was never gonna work for me and my personal taste. For me, a Far Cry game based almost completely around melee just isn't something I'm into. I found the melee combat just boring, and bow combat has never been a highlight for Far Cry in my opinion. If you like Primal, that's fine. You can like Primal all you want. A ton of people love Primal. But just for me, in my opinion, I'm just not a big fan of Primal. I don't think the game will ever work for me, and I'm fine with that. Far Cry Primal, in my opinion, just lands in the C tier. I don't think it belongs in the D tier. For mainly, I've got to give props to Ubisoft, because there's really no other game set in the Stone Age in this Primal era. There's very few. I can't even think of any other game that's tried it. Ubisoft are kind of the only company that have ever done a game set in the Stone Age, and I've got to respect that. So I'll keep in the C tier, because you've got to give respect to the team for at least trying something incredibly unique. Far Cry 5 is a game I'll come straight off and say I think it's a really boring story, with an ending I really goddamn hate. But, on the other hand, I think Far Cry 5 perfected the open world design and gameplay of Far Cry, with one of the most fun and beautiful open worlds, and some of the best gunplay the series has ever seen, and it finally let me fly a plane, which I've been asking for forever, up until this point. Far Cry 5, as you might be able to tell, is a hard one for me. I'm not a big fan of the story, just never clicked with me, and I didn't like the ending, but the rest of the game, I loved. And that's the problem with me with Far Cry 5. The story for me never clicked. I'm not really into cult stories, it's just not my thing. Joseph Seed was alright, I liked him as a villain, but I just found he was barely in the game, and I would have rathered if he was, a bit more prominent than he was. I also have one big problem, which is the voiceless protagonist. I'm not into it when games give me a voiceless protagonist and they will just stand there staring into somebody's soul when they're asking a question. I hate that when they'll ask a question and then your character just never responds. I don't like that at all. Far Cry 5, though, has Hope County, which has got to be one of my favourite open worlds in Far Cry. I don't know what it is, but I love just driving down the roads of Hope County, and I don't know why, it's just so relaxing, and just flying around and just seeing the sights. It's just relaxing and it's just fun. Far Cry 5 overall I'm really conflicted about, but I think its gameplay and open world are so damn good, and I spend so much time going back to the game. I'm conflicted about Far Cry 5, you can probably tell, but I think the gameplay and open world are kind of the main core strengths of a Far Cry game, because if the gameplay and open world are really bad but the story's really good, I just don't think that's enough. I don't think a story is good enough to carry a Far Cry game, but if the gameplay and open world are good enough, I think it can carry a Far Cry game, which is why I think it belongs in the A tier. I don't really like the story very much, but its gameplay is just so fun and addicting, and I still regularly head back to Hope County just to drive around, reset the outposts, and attack them again. The game's just gameplay and world is just too good to not be in the A tier. Oh boy, we've made it to New Dawn. This is the worst Far Cry has ever been. There's no other way for me to say it. I hate so many parts of this game, and my biggest problem is the leveled enemies. I hate the fact that I cannot just start the game up, do the opening stuff, and go explore. You can explore, but if you go too far away, you'll encounter enemies or outposts that are too high level. There'll be enemies that are too high level for your guns to kill. And you might think, just take them down, you go behind them, oh, you don't have skill takedown free unlocked, so you can't do anything. It's more effective for you to take a grenade, pull the pin, and just wait for yourself to blow up, than try fight an outpost of high level enemies. I'll never know why Ubisoft ever thought leveled enemies were a good addition to the Far Cry series. We'll never know. The next thing I really hate in New Dawn is the crafting system. I don't want to grind for materials so I can upgrade my guns. I don't want to upgrade my base, I don't want to make new outfits, I just want to play the damn story and explore the open world. Again, leveled enemies is the main problem because I have to upgrade my guns or I'm not going to do very much damage. The next thing I hate is the villains. Easily, without a doubt, the worst villains in Far Cry. They aren't funny, they aren't scary, and that's it. They just don't do anything. They're just kind of there. I don't even remember their names. That's how forgettable the New Dawn villains were. Such a disappointing waste of a setting, in my opinion. I didn't like how Far Cry 5 ended. I don't like the ending of the game, but I do love a good post-apocalyptic setting. New Dawn's got a nice map and makes good use of its setting, but the story doesn't use the setting at all. It just doesn't work for me. I just did not like the villains, and I think they helped me hate the game even more. Overall, I don't like very much about New Dawn, so as you can guess, it's going in the D tier. I just never have been big on this game. I think, again, it's its core gameplay that is just not good in my opinion. Again, due to leveled enemies and crafting and all that stuff, just not a fan of it. We've made it to the final currently released Far Cry game. Far Cry 6 isn't going to be receiving a spin-off title. Instead, they've just made an expansion called Lost Between Worlds, and I'm going to be nice to this game, and I'm going to say that Lost Between Worlds doesn't exist. It's not a great expansion, so I'm just going to pretend it never happened, and we'll just talk about the base game. Far Cry 6 I was really hyped for when it got announced. Had a beautiful tropical setting we hadn't seen in a long time in a Far Cry game. The first ever city to explore in a Far Cry game, it's gonna be good. There's also tanks. You can drive around tanks, and it had the funny chicken guy from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. How could this game be bad? It could not disappoint us. Yeah, it was disappointing. Far Cry 6 isn't the worst game, but it's not a great game either. It's maybe the most meh or okay game I've ever played. Far Cry 6 takes the gameplay of Far Cry 5 and just makes it worse. They added a stupid ammo system that you have to use. You can't ignore it, unfortunately, but you basically just use the armor-piercing rounds for 90% of the game and you'll be fine. It's just, I don't understand it. Like, who made that decision? Like, it's just dumb. The Resolver backpack were boring in my opinion. I found they didn't really add anything to the game. It's basically just an ultimate ability for Danny to use, and I found myself forgetting about them by about the halfway point. I just kind of stopped using the backpacks. They just weren't all that useful. Well, they were useful, but I didn't see the need in having them. Yara is a nice looking place, to be honest. However, it's way too big, and due to its size, it becomes a bit of a blur. I remember the city well enough, Esperanza. I remember that pretty well. But other than that, I can't really remember anything else from Yara. It just kind of turns into a blur. The map is so massive that I can just kind of see tropical beaches and forest, and that's about all I remember outside of the city. I just think the map is really, really big, and I don't know why. It could have been like half the size, and I think the game would have benefited from that. Finally, let's talk about the story of Far Cry 6. It's not too bad, I guess. I think Danny's a great protagonist. They're easily one of the strongest protagonists in the series, if you ask me. But the rest of the good guy hero characters, I kinda just didn't care about. They were either boring, or they were just killed off, or they had no importance to the story. Once you finish the region, they were in like one more cutscene. So why would I care about them? Anton Castillo I had high hopes for. He's played by Giancarlo Esposito, who's easily one of the best actors ever in terms of playing a villain. His delivery was great here. I think he was an incredibly well acted character, but the overall story and writing just didn't work well. Especially the ending. The ending was not good at all. I really thought the game was going to do something a little more unique with its story, but in the end, it came down to this. Castillo the bad guy, kill him, put the rebels in charge, Yara is saved. And that's about it. That's the entire story. I just kind of wish the game tried something a bit more different. It just seems like the game played everything very safe. It didn't try to do anything new. It didn't try to do anything unique. It just tried to be a plain old boring Far Cry game. When, after coming off of Far Cry 5, I kind of hoped we would get something a bit more daring. Far Cry 5 was a huge risk, taking all these massive different changes to the formula, but Far Cry 6 just played it too safe, I think. I think if it took a bit more risks, I think I would have enjoyed it a hell of a lot more. Overall, I didn't love Far Cry 6, but I didn't hate it. It's just such a okay, meh game, and I think it belongs in the C tier. We're finally at the finish line, and that concludes our Far Cry tier list for 2022. It's been a blast, going back through each Far Cry game, and I'm really excited to see where Far Cry is going to go next. I'm hoping Ubisoft are going to take the feedback to Far Cry 6 and really make Far Cry 7 something special. However, though, it's likely many years before we're going to get to see Far Cry 7. Anyway, thank you for watching. I have been the Intel, and have a lovely day.